بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Obviously, as the sister mentioned, when we talk about celebrity life, what comes to mind? Luxury, glamour, wealth, money, a big fancy house, fancy car. For the men it would be the women, the looks, the cushy life. That's what comes to your mind when you think about celebrity life. But let me ask you a question, sisters. What would you think of someone who had all of that, all of the luxuries, everything, the luxuries of this dunya, but then they decided to give it up? What would you think of that person? What would you think of someone who decided to give all of their money, that big massive mansion, that nice fancy car, and they decided to give it all away for charity? What would you say? You probably say, wow, what a generous person. But deep down inside, you'll be thinking, this person's mad. Has this person gone insane? What would possess him to give away everything? Why would somebody give away everything that they worked the whole entire life for? Why would they give it away? So today, like the sister said, I will narrate to you a story about someone who did exactly that. A story of a young man who completely transformed from riches to rags. And that person is Musab ibn Umayr. Now Musab ibn Umayr, he was a true celebrity. He was known to be the prince of Makkah. That's how he was. He was born and brought up in wealth and luxuries. As they would say, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. That's who Musab ibn Umayr was. He was completely pampered by his parents. He had it all, the money, the looks, the clothes, he had everything. He wore the finest of clothes, the most expensive clothes, the most stylish of clothes Musab ibn Umayr would wear. Only the best for him. He was the fashion icon of his time. And on top of that, Musab ibn Umayr, he was one of the most handsome man of Makkah. His extreme beauty would drive the women crazy. He was every girl's desire, Musab ibn Umayr, to the point that when women would see Musab, and he said that the scent of Musab ibn Umayr could be smelled from a distance. So when the women could see Musab coming, the women of Makkah, they would line up the streets just so that they could attract Musab, because he was so handsome, he was so beautiful. They wanted him to look at them, they wanted him to have a glimpse of them. So he was a true celebrity of his time. However, Musab, even though he had everything in his life, everything that one could dream of, yet still there was something missing in his life. His life was not entirely complete. He wasn't content. He wasn't entirely satisfied. And that is why when Islam began, the early days of Islam, when Musab ibn Umayr, when he started hearing rumors about Muhammad and the religion that he came with and what the people were saying about him, he was really curious. He was really interested. He was very much interested to find out what this religion was. He wanted to know of this new religion. But the question is, why would a man like Musab ibn Umayr be so interested, so curious of a religion like Islam? Why would a man who had everything going in his life, he had it all, he was living life to the max, why would he be so interested in a religion that would lower him? A religion that would bring him down, a religion that would, a religion of the weak, the poor, the slaves, a religion that would make him a subject of oppression, make him a subject of hardship. Because the thing is, Musab, he started thinking about Islam, he started contemplating about Islam at a time when Islam was at its hardest. The Muslims were going through a difficult time. They were being oppressed, they were being persecuted, they were being mocked and ridiculed. The Prophet ﷺ was being mocked and ridiculed. That was a time when Musab ibn Umayr was thinking about Islam. Even though it was such a difficult time for the Muslims, still Musab ibn Umayr was thinking and contemplating about Islam. But why? Was he thinking about Islam? The reason for that, my dear sisters, is like I said, you can have everything in this world. You can have all the riches, you can have all the glamour, the luxury, but still you'll find that there's something missing in your life. You'll find that your life is not complete, that you're not content. And that's why you find it in a lot of celebrities. What do? They end up overdosing themselves. They're celebrities, they have the big mansions, the cars, the women, the fame, the glamour, everything. Yet they are overdosing themselves and they're committing suicide. Loads of them are on drugs. So many of them are drowning their sorrows in alcohol, on the brink of destruction. Why? Because they're not satisfied, they're not content, there's something missing in their life. And Musab ibn Umayr, he was a celebrity whose life was incomplete, who has something missing in his life. And who was that? Who was that was missing in his life? It was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His creator, the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the love of his creator was missing in his life. He needed his Lord to make his life complete. And that is why when he heard about Islam, immediately Musab went to Darul Arqam. That is where the Muslims, that is where the Prophet and the Muslims, the believers, would meet, and the Prophet would teach them Islam. Because Allah was missing in his life, that is why he went from the first moment, from his first meeting, he sat down and he listened to the recitation of the Quran, and he contemplated on the words of Allah. Immediately, instantly, his heart was inclined. Instantly, sweetness of Iman had entered into his heart, and he had taken over the whole of his heart, and he had embraced Islam instantly. And Musab ibn Umayr, my dear sisters, I'm not talking about Musab ibn Umayr 30 years old. I'm not talking about Musab ibn Umayr 25 years old. I'm not talking about Musab ibn Umayr 20 years old. This was Musab ibn Umayr, somebody who was in his teens. He was still a teenager. It said roughly 13 years old, subhanAllah. 13 years old, and he was thinking about Islam. He was contemplating about Islam. He had embraced Islam. A 13-year-old, that is a high school kid. Think about a 13-year-old today. Think about, this is an age where most kids are too busy playing with their computer games. They're too busy on their PS3s and their PSPs and their phones, their iPhones, text messaging their friends, BBM messaging their friends, wherever, they're chatting to girls. This is what the youth are busy, a typical 13-year-old. But, subhanAllah, Musab ibn Umayr at that age was contemplating Islam. Nowadays the youth, they're dreaming of that life. They wish that they could live a life of Musab ibn Umayr, that glamorous, that celebrity life. But what they don't understand is what Musab ibn Umayr understood. That this life, the moment Musab became a Muslim, he realized that this life is fake. It's all fake. Why? Because, once upon a time this man was known for his glamour. Once upon a time he was known for his, his wealth, his looks, his, that celebrity life. But the moment he took off that garment of fame, the moment he took it off, he became a nobody. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted to know him. And that is reality. That is the truth. That, people, they want to have that celebrity life. They want fame. Why? Because they want people to love them. They want people to praise them. They want people to admire them. Isn't that why? They want fame because of that. But the truth is that these very people, they will desert you. The truth is that these very people, they will dump you. The moment you lose all that, the moment you lose that image, that outer appearance, you're a nobody. And that's same with our friends, fake friends, who are only your friends because of your popularity, who are only your friends because, of your looks, or the way you dress, or your fancy car that you drive, or the money that you have. They're only your friends because of that. The moment that goes, they will go too. And that is the reality. So Musab ibn Umayr, he became a Muslim, but he kept his religion discreet. He kept his Islam, his conversion a secret, because obviously times were very difficult. The Muslims were being persecuted. But that wasn't what Musab was scared of. The hardship, the oppression that he would face from the Quraysh did not scare Musab at all. He could handle that. But what he could not handle, what he feared the most, was his mother. He feared his mother so much. The anger of his mother. This woman, he feared her more than anybody in Makkah. In fact, the whole of Makkah feared this woman. That's how dangerous, that's how harsh and stern this woman was. That everybody was afraid of her. And on top of that, she hated Islam. She hated Islam. She was a great enemy to Islam. So he hid his religion, he hid his deen from her. But even then, he would still go and learn about Islam. He would go to Darul Arqam. He would go, back and forth to learn about Islam in secret. But then what happened? One day, what happened was he got spotted. He got spotted by the paparazzis. The paparazzis who go following the celebrities. The moment trying to get pictures, the moment they see something, the moment they find a news, they have it printed on the papers. They have it put in the magazine, and it's headlines, isn't it? So he got spotted by a paparazzi, and from that day, Musab's conversion had become celebrity headline. Everybody was talking about Musab, how Musab became a Muslim. And eventually that news had reached his mother, that her son had become a Muslim. this dirty, filthy word, Muslim. Because at that time, this word was such a dirty, filthy word. They hated Islam. Just like today, if somebody becomes Muslim, it's like the worst thing that could happen. I remember once a sister, I met this Reba sister and we were talking, she was telling me her conversion and everything like that. She was I asked about her family and she said her family were dead against it. Her family, her father said to her, I'd rather you be Gay than to be a Muslim. That's how much they hated Islam, subhanAllah. So his mother, Musab ibn Umayr, his mother, she found out about his conversion and she was absolutely furious. She was mad, she went berserk. She wanted to beat the life out of her son. And she was about to. She was literally about to beat him up. And then she restrained herself. Maybe it's the motherly love, her motherly instinct that stopped her. But still she was really angry. She was really angry and instead what did she do? She took Musab ibn Umayr. She tied him up. She shackled her son. She tied him up and she took him and locked him in a room. He was imprisoned in his own home. And, she didn't give him any food, no drink, no nothing. And he stayed like this for a long time. But eventually he escaped. He escaped from this imprisonment somehow. And he joined the migration of, he joined the Muslims who had migrated to Abyssinia. And he went with them and he stayed there for a little while, but then he came back. He came back to Makkah. And when he came back this time, his mother caught him again. And his mother said, I'm going to lock you up again. But this time Musab ibn Umayr, his iman was so strong, he was full of iman, he was so firm, and he replied back, he said to her, he goes, if any one of you touched me, then it would be either your life or my life. That's how he was serious. He was so serious, he did not care. And at that point, the mother, she knew that she had lost her son. She knew that there was no way of changing her son. So Musab ibn Umayr, he chose Islam. He chose to embrace Islam. And along with it, he chose to embrace the life of hardship. Along with it, he chose to embrace the life of simplicity, a life of complete obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But, Musab ibn Umayr, he from that day on, he became a man. He became a man from, wearing the finest of clothes to now wearing the poorest of clothes. He became the man from eating the best of food to now, eating one day and going hungry the next. That's the life that he lived. He left behind his luxury life and he did not look back. He did not turn back. But one thing I want you to understand, my dear sisters, just because Musab ibn Umayr gave up that luxury life, just because he lived a life of a poor person and he lived a life of in hardship, does not mean that he lowered his status in any way. Not at all. In fact, rather, his status in the eyes of the believers had increased. He had become far greater in the eyes of the believers. It is said that the Sahabas, whenever they would see Mus'ab, whenever they would see him, they would lower their gaze and tears would fall down their eyes. They would weep because they knew who Musab ibn Umayr was and what he had become. They knew what he had and what he had sacrificed. They would be so saddened and heartbroken to see the once Prince of Makkah to become like this. His status in the eyes of Allah had increased. His status in the eyes of the Messenger had increased, and his status in the eyes of the believers had increased. So one thing we need to understand, my dear sisters, do not ever think by you giving up your fame, your luxury, your fashion, your clothes, all of that luxury life, by you giving that up, that you would lower your status. No. By Allah, you would increase your status. But one thing that we probably would want to question is, just like the way the Quraysh, they could not comprehend, they could not understand how Musab ibn Umayr, how he could give up that life. What, was he mad? Was he insane? No, Musab ibn Umayr was not mad. He was not insane. He was not under the influence of any magic of a magician. The only magic that influenced Musab was the magic of Iman. The only thing that had, entered into his heart was the sweetness of Iman. And that's the beautiful thing about sweetness of Iman, my dear sisters. Once it enters into your heart, something amazing happens. All of a sudden, you realize that you have formed this new relationship with Allah. That you have formed this new relationship with Allah that you never had before. Something amazing happens, and that's exactly what happened to Musab. So Musab ibn Umayr, he was a man of sacrifice. And that wasn't the only greatness, of his life. His greatness of his life doesn't stop there. Musab ibn Umayr was the first ambassador of Islam. He was the first envoy of Islam. The first person to preach outside the borders of Makkah. At that time, the Prophet ﷺ, he was seeking authority, and he was, going from tribe to tribe,
to seek authority. And at that time what happened was there was a group of Muslims who came to him, a handful of Muslims who came to the Prophet to embrace Islam, to give their pledge of allegiance. And they asked the Prophet if he could give them. They requested the Prophet if he could give them someone who they could take back to teach them about Islam. So this was a huge responsibility. This was, as one of the most important and most vital events in Islamic history. It was the turning point. This was, the Prophet ﷺ knew that this could be the beginning, the start of something amazing. And he knew that he needed somebody he could trust. Somebody who would do this job properly. Somebody who would put his heart and soul into it. So who do you think the Prophet ﷺ chose? Who do you think he would choose? He had great men amongst him. The likes of Abu Bakr, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, Zayd bin Haritha. He had so many great Sahabas around him. But who does the Prophet ﷺ choose? He chose a 17-year-old young teenager, Musab ibn Umayr. He chose him to take on this task. Subhanallah, such a huge responsibility. From above all of the Sahabas who were much older, who were much wiser, who were much more closer to the Prophet ﷺ in relation, yet he chose Musab ibn Umayr. Can you imagine any 17-year-old fulfilling this task in today's day and age? Can you see a 17-year-old doing this task? Can you really imagine it? We can't even trust our youngsters, we can't even trust our youth to go down to the corner shop and get you something. They'll end up ruining something. They'll end up, budging up your shopping list or something like that. You can't even trust them to do that, because why? They have not been brought up with that responsibility. But Musab ibn Umayr, he took on this role. I was thinking, me giving dawah to one person, non-Muslim, I find it so hard. At work, I find it so hard to bring up a conversation with the non-Muslims. Musab ibn Umayr, he didn't have to just speak to one person or two people. He had to address the whole community. What a huge responsibility he had. And all on his own. And on top of that, he was only 17 years old. SubhanAllah. But the Prophet ﷺ, he knew what he was doing. He knew that he chose the right person, the best man for the job. Because of Musab ibn Umayr's character, because of his mannerism, because of his intellect, because of the way, his knowledge in Quran, the way he would address it to the people, it would reach the people's heart. Because of that, he chose Musab. And when he was given that role, when he was given that responsibility, what do you think Musab ibn Umayr did? What do you think he said? He didn't say, oh no, I can't do it, it's too much of a big job for me, I'm too young, I'm too inexperienced, I'm not confident. He didn't say any of that. He did it without any excuse. Today, he didn't think he didn't think about his future, he didn't think about his ambitions. He's a young lad. 17-year-old, any 17-year-old today, they'll be thinking about the future. They'll be planning the career path. I want to become a doctor, I want to become a scientist, I want to become a teacher. But he didn't think like that, and he did it. Today, we will make 101 excuses not to do something. Any dawah will say, oh, I can't do it, I'm not confident enough, that's not my forte, I'm not experienced, this isn't my, this is not my area. We'll make 101 excuses. But what we don't understand is, if we stopped and thought about it, we would realize how much of a big statement that is. Dawah, my dear sisters, is a duty that is fard. We know it is fard. The moment Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَاسْتَ بِمَا تُؤْمَرْ وَعَرِضًا لِلْمُشْرِكِينَ, that proclaim openly, publicly that which you have been commanded, and do not care about the mushrikeen. From that day on, that became a responsibility, that became a duty upon every one of us. A duty like all other duties, a duty like salah. So when you are given a role, when you are given this duty, and if you say no, think about who you're saying no to. You are saying no to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the King of all kings. How dare us to say no? How dare us to say no, I can't do it? When you're at work and your employer says to you, do this job, would you say no? No, because you know you'll get the sack. But how dare us to say no to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This is how serious it is. So Musab ibn Umayr, he knew his responsibility, he knew his duty, that he had to command, he had to teach the people about Tawheed, he had to teach them about Islam, he had to tell them about the deen. So he went to Medina, he began his preach, he went to street after street, door to door, telling the people about Islam, and he would, spread the message of Islam. And his dawah was so excellent, my dear sisters. MashaAllah, his dawah was absolutely superb. He had such an impact, a positive impact on the people. So much that people were embracing Islam in flocks. And it is said that within less than a year, Musab ibn Umayr, he brought back 70 Muslims who were ready to give that pledge. Subhanallah. That's how effective Musab ibn Umayr's da'wah was. Through the hands of Musab ibn Umayr, not through the hands of the Prophet, through the hands of Musab ibn Umayr, that many Sahabas, many great Sahabas had embraced Islam by the will of Allah. Great Sahabas, chiefs, great leading figures of tribes like Usayd ibn Khudair and Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, great Sahabas like them. Usayd ibn Khudair, who he was? He was the one who would recite so beautifully that the angels would come down to listen to his recitation. Subhanallah, a product of Musab ibn Umayr's da'wah. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, who was he? He was the one who died in the battle of Khandaq, who died in the battle of Ahzab. And he said when he died, the day he died, the Prophet ﷺ said, on this day, the throne, the arsh of Allah shook. That's how much he loved Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. Subhanallah, another product of the da'wah of Musab ibn Umayr's da'wah. Subhanallah. These were the youth, my dear sisters. It was youth like Musab ibn Umayr and Usama bin Zayd. Remember Usama bin Zayd? The one 17 or 17-year-old who led an army, who led a whole army. The Prophet ﷺ said, do not delay the army of Usama. It's youth like this, my dear sisters, who would lead the ummah to victory. Our youth then, the youth before, they were in the forefront of the da'wah, of the jihad, But youth today, our youth today are in the forefront of nightclubs, in the forefront of cinemas, or in the forefront of shisha bars. The youth then, they were the ones who would bring honor, who would bring dignity, who would bring pride to the ummah. And today the youth, they are the cause of us losing our honor. They are the cause of us, degrading ourselves. They are the ones who are putting us to shame. Musab ibn Umayr, he fought in the battle of Uhud, and something amazing happened. Something amazing happened at this time. Again, Musab ibn Umayr was given a really important role. Once again, he was given a very important role, and that role was to hold onto the banner, the flag of La ilaha illallah. And that role was really important then, and it is still now. Because that means when you have that role, when you have that responsibility, that means you cannot let the banner of La ilaha illallah fall. You cannot let it go. You cannot let it drop. Your only excuse is death. And that's how much of a huge responsibility he had. And we know the story of Uhud, what the fitna happened, that the archers disobeyed the Prophet, they left their place, and because of that, the Prophet ﷺ was exposed to the enemies. So much so that he was beaten so badly. Our beloved Prophet ﷺ was beaten so badly, he said that his tooth had been broken, that his jaw had been split. He was beaten so badly, so much so that the people thought he had died. And they were saying the Prophet had died, and at that point a lot of them had become so disheartened, they gave up, they couldn't carry on. But Musab ibn Umayr, he wasn't like that. He was not like that. He continued fighting, and he continued holding the banner, to the point when somebody came up to him and said, don't you know Musab? What are you doing? Don't you know that the Prophet has died? What did Musab ibn Umayr say? What did he say? Subhanallah, he said some of the most greatest words. He said, Muhammad was only but a prophet, and there were many prophets that died before him. And he said, we are not fighting for Muhammad, we are fighting for the deen of Allah. And he continued fighting, and he continued holding onto the banner. And at the same time, people were saying that he was alive, the Prophet was alive. And when he heard that, Musab ibn Umayr, he started fighting. He started fighting so fiercely, like a lion. He had the banner on one hand, and he had the sword in the other. And his main objective was to distract the enemies towards him, to distract them away from the Prophet towards him. So he was defending not only his deen, he was defending the man he loved the most. Subhanallah. And he was fighting so much, to the point that he said he had the banner in his hand and he would not let it go. He had it up high, to the point when the kuffar, they came and they struck his hand. They struck his right hand and the banner fell. And then what do you think Musab ibn Umayr did? Any one of us, we think that's it, enough, I had enough, can't do anymore. My arms cut off, I'm in so much pain. What do you think he did? No, he didn't give up. He picked up the banner with his other hand, and he carried it with his other hand, to the point when the left hand got struck by the enemy. They struck his left hand, and then the banner fell again. Subhanallah. At this point, you would definitely say no. Maybe the first time you could stuck it through, you probably can bear the pain. But the second time, you have no arms left. You will say, that's enough, I can't do it. And there will be no blame on you if you didn't do it. But what does he do? He picks up the banner between whatever was left of his arm. He picked it up and he held it against his chest. He still would not let it go, subhanallah, and he fought continuously until it is said that he was inflicted with 70 wounds. 70 wounds, and the last of them was a spear through his chest, subhanallah. And then he died, and he said that It is said that when he fell to the ground, his words was, Muhammad was only but a prophet and many prophets died before him. That was his words, subhanallah. You know, after the battle, when the Prophet ﷺ, he came back and he was looking for two bodies, two people that he loved the most, Hamza and Musab ibn Umayr. He was looking for their body. And when he came and he saw Musab's body, he was weeping. The Prophet ﷺ started weeping. He was crying to see this prince of Makkah in that state. It is said that he was trampled all over. It is said that he was beaten, stabbed. His face was completely unrecognizable. The man that was so beautiful, the man who was so handsome, is now unrecognizable. Subhanallah. Look at his sacrifice, my dear sisters. And he said that he had the banner. He said that they found that the banner was between his teeth. Even then, he wouldn't let go of it. Subhanallah. And the Prophet ﷺ, he began weeping. And he said the ayah, among the believers there are men who have been true to their covenant with Allah. What is that covenant, my dear sisters? You should know that. We should all know that, because that covenant each one of us have made. He was true to his covenant, and that covenant was La ilaha illallah, to worship Allah, to obey Allah, to follow Him, to sacrifice everything, the whole of you, to give it all up for the sake of Allah. That was the covenant that he fulfilled. And Musab ibn Umayr, he kept that promise. You see, my dear sisters, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for Musab ibn Umayr to give up everything for the sake of Allah. It wasn't enough for him. It wasn't enough that he migrated for the sake of Allah. That wasn't enough for him. It wasn't enough that he went to Medina to do dawah, to open up Islam. That wasn't enough for him. It wasn't enough that he went into the battlefield and sacrificed his life. That wasn't enough for him. He wanted martyrdom. That's what he desired, my dear sisters. And it is said that Musab ibn Umayr, he gave up everything. When they went back, when the Sahabas went to his house to find his coffin, to shroud him with, they went to his house, and do you know what they found? The only things that they found was a bowl to make wudu with, and a cup to draw the water with, and half of a coffin. The man that was once the wealthiest man of Makkah had not enough cloth to cover himself for his coffin. Subhanallah, my dear sisters. They said that if they had covered his head, his feet would expose. When they covered his feet, his head would expose. And to the point that they had to just cover him with grass. Subhanallah, my dear sisters. Let us take a lesson from the life of Musab ibn Umayr. Let us try and raise our children to be like him, my dear sisters. The youth, my dear sisters, take a lesson from this. Stop saying that you can't give up your desire. Stop saying that, I can't, I'm finding it so hard, chatting to boys is such a difficult, it's such a test for me, I can't give it up, I can't give up my desires, I can't stop fantasizing about boys. Stop saying that. Look at this man, he gave everything up. He gave everything up. He is an example for us. It is possible, my dear sister. I know it's hard. I know times are hard. But that's why I always say that I rate youth. I rate the youth that are practicing Islam right now, because the times are difficult. It is difficult. For a youth to practice Islam right now, it is hard, and I rate them. And that's why the reward is so great. The Prophet ﷺ said that there are 7 people who will be given shade on that day when there will be no shade except for Allah, and that one is the youth that practices Islam at a young age. So let us take lessons from his life, and let us make our generations full of more people like Musab ibn Umayr. Any good is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, any mistake is mine, and I ask for forgiveness. Jazakallah.